Up on the hills above the Pacific, there's a place that doesn't feel like a home. It feels like a statement that refused to stop growing. Hearst Castle sits above the coast like it was planted there by sheer will. Terraces, towers, fountains, and gardens arrange the way power likes to arrange the world. Beautiful, precise, and slightly unreal. And that's the first truth of this story. This palace was never built to be enough. It was built to win, to outshine the ocean, to outshine Europe, to outshine time. The man behind it, William Randolph Hearst, didn't just want a retreat. He wanted a stage where the most famous people on earth could arrive, be dazzled, and leave with one thought: he is bigger than all of us. He started building in 1919, calling the estate La Cuesta Encantada, the Enchanted Hill, and by the late 1940s, it had grown into a complex with a towering main house, guest houses, and vast gardens spread across 127 acres. But here's what most visitors miss. The enchantment is also a warning, because a place like this doesn't rise from comfort, it rises from appetite. It rises from a belief that if you can collect enough art, enough rooms, enough guests, enough admiration, you can finally silence whatever is restless inside you. And the darker cost isn't a single scandal, it's the pattern, the invisible rules, the pressure to perform, the way a palace can become a machine, feeding on attention, feeding on control, feeding on the idea that the next upgrade will finally make the emptiness stop. So when people ask, why did he build it like this? The honest answer might be, because ordinary happiness was too small for him. This wasn't just a castle on a hill, it was a hunger with architecture. To understand Hearst Castle, you have to understand the kind of man who would look at an entire coastline and think, I can turn this into my name. Hearst grew up surrounded by privilege, but privilege doesn't automatically create confidence. Sometimes it creates something sharper, the fear of being ordinary. And when you're raised in a world where status is oxygen, the worst thing you can be is forgettable. He didn't become powerful just by inheriting wealth. He became powerful by mastering the loudest currency of modern life, attention. He built a media empire that could shape reputations, topple careers, and tilt public mood like a hand turning a dial. And when a person spends decades learning they can move the world with headlines, it changes them. Because attention is addictive in a very specific way. It never feels complete. You win today's cycle, and tomorrow you need another one. You dominate the conversation, and soon you're terrified of silence. You start measuring your worth not in peace, but in impact. Now imagine what happens when a person like that wants a home. He doesn't build a home, he builds a symbol. That's why the estate didn't stay a modest ranch retreat. It expanded into something theatrical, part museum, part palace, part performance. A place where the walls themselves whisper, look at what I can do. And he wasn't doing it alone. He brought in Julia Morgan, a brilliant architect with discipline, taste, and the kind of patience this project demanded. Over years, she translated his imagination into stone, tile, towers, staircases, and rooms that were designed not just to impress, but to overwhelm. Here's where the cost begins to show, because when a man with endless ambition hires someone talented enough to make it real, the project stops having natural limits. It becomes an evolving appetite. A normal build has an end date. This one had revisions, more wings, more collections, more guests, more spectacle, more just one last improvement. And the castle became the physical proof of a psychological truth. When you tie your identity to being larger than life, you can't ever rest. You can't ever say, this is enough, because enough feels like losing. So the hill grew because the hunger grew.
Most estates are designed around living. This one was designed around arrival.
Picture the climb. Guests traveling the coast, then winding upward into a world that feels separated from ordinary rules. Once you enter, everything around you signals the same message. This is not a weekend house. This is a kingdom. By the time the complex matured, the heart of the property was Casa Grande, the 115-room main building, surrounded by 3 guest houses and elaborate outdoor terraces. And it wasn't just big, it was curated. The scale was part of the trick, because when you're walking through spaces this grand, your own life starts to feel smaller in comparison. That's how palaces work. They don't just show wealth, they rearrange your sense of what matters. Hearst filled the estate with art and objects that carried their own prestige: paintings, tapestries, sculptural fragments, ceilings rescued from other places, history extracted and reassembled like decor. It's the kind of collecting that says, not only do I have money, I have time, taste, reach, and access. But the real genius of the Hill wasn't just what he bought, it was the system. Because to run a place like this, you need a hidden engine: food, laundry, flowers, cleaning, repairs, schedules, staff routes that avoid guest sightlines, supply deliveries that arrive quietly. The perfect performance depends on everything you don't see. And that's where the enchantment becomes unsettling. The estate was built like an illusion that needed constant labor to stay alive. The beauty wasn't effortless, it was maintained daily by people whose names never made the guest lists. This is why the castle can feel both glamorous and heavy. It offers a fantasy, a world where life is gorgeous and frictionless, but underneath that fantasy is constant work and constant control. Because a palace is not a building, it's a machine that turns money into awe. When people think of Hearst Castle, they picture movie star weekends, laughter on terraces, elegant dinners, poolside sunlight, the sense that the world's most famous people somehow wandered into a private dream. And yes, the parties were real. But what made them fascinating wasn't just glamour. It was the fact that the glamour had rules. Guests were invited into an environment where everything was designed: the timing, the meals, the conversations, the setting. When the lighting is perfect, when the table looks like a painting, when the rooms feel like Europe, your brain relaxes into the story you're being sold. This is the highest level of life. But high-level life has a hidden tension. You're always being measured. In spaces like this, social behavior becomes performance. What you wear matters. What you say matters. Who you sit near matters. You're not just having fun, you're signaling. And the host, when he's a man like Hearst, isn't just throwing parties for kindness. He's gathering people into his orbit. Because that's what true power loves: proximity. If the most famous guests choose your hill, then your hill becomes a center of gravity. And once you're the center, you don't want to lose it. So the guests arrived, enjoyed luxury, and left with stories. But there's another side to that. The castle also trained people to depend on the experience. A weekend like that makes ordinary life feel plain. You go back home and your rooms feel smaller, your dinners feel quieter, your world feels less special. And suddenly you crave the hill again, not because you need it, but because it changed your baseline. That's the cost of glamour at this level. It creates hunger in other people too. And a host who understands that can hold power without ever raising his voice. He just builds a world so intoxicating that people voluntarily return again and again because they want to feel that high one more time. There's a strange dynamic behind every legendary building: the visionary who wants everything and the builder who must make it possible. In this story, Hearst brought imagination and obsession. Julia Morgan brought structure. And that combination produced brilliance and endless revisions. Because Hearst Castle wasn't a single plan, it was a living project, constantly changing as Hearst's tastes shifted, as new art arrived, as new ideas struck, as the need to impress evolved. To Julia Morgan, architecture is discipline. It's solving problems with elegance. It's making a place work, not just look good. But for Hearst, the estate was also psychological, a place where he could create the world the way he wanted it to be. And those two forces can clash. The architect thinks in systems. The owner thinks in moods. One day the pool is a garden feature. Then it becomes a swimming pool. Then it becomes a grand myth. And suddenly you're rebuilding something that already exists because the dream grew. That's not a small detail. It's the whole pattern. The castle reflects what happens when money removes friction. Normally, reality says no quickly. Budget limits, time limits, labor limits. Here, reality is delayed. It's negotiated. It's reshaped. So the estate becomes a mirror. If you can buy another revision, you never have to face the uncomfortable moment where you accept imperfection. And if you never accept imperfection, you never truly rest. This is why places like this can feel alive and uneasy at the same time. They are achievements, yes, but they are also evidence of a mind that wouldn't settle. Because settling means stopping, and stopping means hearing yourself. So the hill kept changing, and the question quietly grew louder. Was he building a castle or building a way to avoid silence?
Every palace needs a centerpiece, something that instantly becomes the image people remember. Here, it was water. The outdoor Neptune pool wasn't built as a simple amenity. It was built as a declaration. Construction on the Neptune pool evolved over years, stretching through multiple versions between 1924 and 1936, because Hearst wanted it bigger, longer, more mythic. And then there's the indoor Roman pool, a shimmering space of tile and reflection, more temple than recreation. Here's what's important. These pools aren't just luxurious, they are cinematic. They exist for the eye. They're built to create a feeling. You are not in California anymore. You are in a myth. And myths do something dangerous to humans. They make us want to live inside them. For guests, the pools were irresistible, a place to gather, to be seen, to laugh, to pose, to become part of the story. For Hearst, they were proof that he could manufacture a reality where everything looked like legend. But the dark cost in beauty like this is maintenance. It's constant attention. It's the need for the fantasy to stay perfect. Water stains, tile cracks, fountains break, weather erodes, the ocean air eats surfaces slowly, and perfection becomes a job. When your identity is tied to being extraordinary, even small flaws feel like threats. So the estate doesn't just host you, it demands you. And that's the unsettling twist. The pools look like freedom, sunlight, laughter, open air, but they were also part of a larger system, a spectacle that must be preserved, controlled, and kept impressive. Because if the centerpiece loses its magic, the myth weakens. And a man who builds myths doesn't tolerate weakening.
One of the strangest details about the estate is that it wasn't only a palace, it was a world that wanted to include everything. Not just art and architecture, but animals, a private zoo, exotic creatures on a hill above the sea, as if nature itself was another collectible. It's easy to laugh at that idea today, but psychologically it fits perfectly. If you're building a kingdom, you want your kingdom to feel total. You want guests to feel like they entered a place where ordinary limits don't apply. And yet, the zoo also exposes something darker, the desire to own wonder instead of simply experiencing it. There's a difference between being amazed by something and needing to capture it. In that era, wealthy collectors treated the world like a menu. Art, furniture, ceilings, animals, acquire, display, curate. The same instinct that pulls rare paintings onto your walls can also pull living creatures into your orbit. For guests, the zoo was entertainment, another only here detail that made the hill feel legendary. For Hearst, it was proof of reach, proof of control, proof that he could make the impossible arrive at his doorstep. But in the long run, that kind of thinking does something to you. Because when you keep turning experiences into possessions, the joy becomes thinner. You stop being satisfied by simple beauty. You need bigger beauty, rarer beauty, more surprising beauty. And the more you chase that, the harder it becomes to feel peace. So the zoo is not just a quirky footnote. It's a symbol of a life where enough is always moving, always retreating like the horizon.
Now we get to the part that truly makes this story bingeable, the hidden system. Because when people watch these documentaries, they're not just asking, how rich were they? They're asking, how did this lifestyle actually function? A place like Hearst Castle doesn't run on elegance, it runs on logistics. Think about it. The linens alone, the meals, the cleaning schedule, the repairs, the inventory of tableware, the flowers that must look fresh daily, the staff who must appear and disappear without breaking the illusion, the coordination required so guests feel like the house is magically perfect at all times. This is how old money becomes a performance. You remove visible effort. The guest sees a flawless room. They don't see the morning team that polished, aligned, replaced, and corrected. The guest sees a glamorous dinner. They don't see the prep, the heat, the pressure, the timing, the hierarchy, the exhaustion. And that's where pressure lives. Not only for the workers, though especially for them, but also for the host. Because the host is maintaining an identity. If the performance slips, it's not just messy, it's embarrassing. So the system becomes strict. Routes are planned, doors are assigned, behavior is managed. Staff learn to read moods, anticipate needs, and solve problems before they become visible. This is what effortless really means in elite spaces. Someone else is carrying the weight. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The more perfect the surface looks, the more pressure exists underneath. That's why these palaces feel both beautiful and tense. They are achievements, but they are also environments where perfection is demanded like a law. And when perfection becomes law, human warmth becomes optional. That's the cost.
At a certain point, when you become a person like Hearst, you stop living in normal relationships. You live in orbit. People don't just hang out with you, they attend you, they visit you, they perform around you. And even when they like you, there's always a shadow. What are they getting from being close? This is where the darker emotion enters the story. Loneliness inside crowds. A palace full of guests can still be a lonely place because the guests leave. The staff keep professional distance, and the host is trapped inside a role. You can't be messy. You can't be ordinary. You can't have a quiet breakdown. You can't confess weakness. You're the myth maker, and myths don't get to be tired. So the same castle that brings you admiration can also lock you into constant performance. You're always hosting, always curating, always improving, always controlling. And control is a strange coping mechanism. It makes you feel safe, but it also shrinks your world to what you can manage. You start solving emotional problems with architectural solutions. If I build something more beautiful, I'll feel better. If I add something rarer, the emptiness will quiet down. But it never lasts, because you can't furnish your way out of the human need to be known. So the hill grows, the parties grow, the legend grows, and the question grows too. When the guests go home and the halls go quiet, what is left?
Every palace needs a story that makes it feel alive. For Hearst Castle, part of that story was Hollywood, the feeling that the modern world's brightest stars were stepping into an old world dream.
And with Hollywood comes a particular kind of fantasy. This moment will last. But Hollywood doesn't last. Fame doesn't last. Even parties don't last. So the castle becomes a machine for repeating moments, new weekends, new guests, new dinners, new laughter, trying to recreate the high again. There's a reason this pulls viewers so hard. It's the same loop people live today, just with bigger chandeliers. We chase highlights, we collect experiences, we post proof, we try to freeze time. Hearst did it in stone. And if you look at it with that lens, the castle feels less like history and more like a warning about modern life. When you build your identity around constant spectacle, peace starts to feel boring. You don't crave calm. You crave another peak. So you host again, upgrade again, invite again, collect again. Because stopping would mean facing the silence. And the silence is where the cost lives.
No matter how powerful you feel, history eventually walks into the room. As the decades moved forward, the world changed. Economics tightened. War reshaped priorities. Labor and materials shifted. And even a giant hilltop dream had to deal with reality. This is where the story becomes quietly tragic. You can't freeze an era. A castle like this belongs to a time when excess was celebrated as achievement. But when the world becomes serious, when societies face crisis, when public opinion shifts, excess starts to look different. It starts to look out of touch. And that's when the palace begins to feel heavier. Not because it stops being beautiful, but because beauty alone can't justify its existence. It needs purpose. It needs a future. When the world stops worshiping the fantasy begins to crack. So the hill that once felt like the center of everything begins to feel like a relic of a mood that's gone.
There's something haunting about the way great eras end. Not with explosions, but with fewer invitations, fewer weekends, less laughter. A palace like Hearst Castle doesn't collapse dramatically. It simply becomes less necessary. The social world moves elsewhere. New celebrities rise, new tastes take over, and the energy that made the hill feel alive starts to fade. This is the emotional core of the documentary. The idea that even the most powerful person can't force a moment to last forever. You can build towers, but you can't build permanence. You can collect priceless objects, but you can't collect time. So the castle remains magnificent, but increasingly detached from the life it was built to host. And that's the cost of building a place around spectacle. When spectacle ends, what's left is just a very expensive silence.
Eventually, the hill shifts from private dream to public legacy. Today, the estate is part of the Hearst San Simeon State Historical Monument and is operated as a museum-like destination. That sounds like victory, and in a way it is, because the place survives. People still arrive, still stare, still feel that jolt of how is this real? But something changes when a palace becomes a museum. The myth becomes a lesson. Visitors don't just see beauty, they see the psychology of a century, the ambition, the consumption, the desire to own history, the need to turn attention into architecture. And if you listen closely, the hill teaches one unsettling truth. Even the biggest dream can become a monument to what someone couldn't stop chasing.
So what was the real cost? Not murder, not ghosts. The real cost was the pressure of perfection. When you build a world that must always look extraordinary, you create a prison made of expectations. Your guests expect amazement. Your staff expect standards. Your reputation depends on staying above. And you, the owner, become the person who can't step down without feeling like you've fallen. That's why nothing was ever enough, because enough would mean accepting you're human,
accepting you don't need to win every room, every dinner, every weekend, accepting that you can be loved without being legendary. But palaces don't teach you that lesson. They teach you to keep going. And the more you keep going, the harder it becomes to stop. Hearst Castle is still breathtaking. The terraces still catch the sun. The pools still look like mythology. The rooms still feel like a dare. But the deeper story isn't just, look how rich he was. The deeper story is what wealth can't solve. It can buy beauty. It can buy admiration. It can buy the best parties, the best guests, the best objects. But it can't buy the moment when you finally feel satisfied. And maybe that's why this place grips us. Because it's not just about one billionaire. It's about a human pattern we still live inside. We keep building. We keep collecting. We keep upgrading. We keep chasing the next peak. And we tell ourselves the next thing will finally make us feel complete. Then we arrive, and we still feel hungry. That's the cost, and it's written into every stone on the enchanted hill.